Welcome to Creepy Corner Stories, where the shadows whisper and the unknown comes to life. Tonight, we delve into terrifying true horror stories that will make you question what's lurking in the dark. These aren't just tales, they happen to real people, and they'll chill you to the bone. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare for a journey into the unexplainable. Let's begin. Story 1: The Watcher. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus thought they had found their dream home when they purchased 657 Boulevard, a stately 6-bedroom house in the upscale suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. The $1.3 million property was perfect for their growing family, offering the space and charm they had always wanted for their 3 young children. Excited to move in, they began making renovations to the house before settling in. But their dream quickly turned into a nightmare when they received a chilling letter in the mail, the first of many, from someone who called themselves the Watcher. The letter arrived just 3 days after the purchase. It was addressed simply to the new owner, and began with a seemingly friendly welcome. "Dearest new neighbor at 67 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." But as Derek read further, the tone became increasingly sinister. The writer claimed their family had been tasked with watching the house for decades and described 657 Boulevard as a property of great importance to them. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. The letter only grew more disturbing as it went on. The Watcher described the Broaddus children as young blood and hinted at an unhealthy obsession with them. "I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. Will they play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? If I were them, I would be very afraid. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream." They also revealed details about the family's routine that only someone closely observing the house could know. Terrified, Derek rushed home to show the letter to Maria. The couple immediately contacted the police, who took the matter seriously. An officer arrived at the house and advised the Broadduses not to tell anyone about the letter, as any of their new neighbors could be a suspect. But just days later, another letter arrived. This one angrier and more threatening. The Watcher criticized the renovations they were making to the home, accusing them of ruining its historic charm. "The house is crying from all the pain it is going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past." As the letters continued, the Broadduses' fear grew. They hired private investigators and consulted former FBI agents to help uncover the identity of the Watcher. Linguistic experts analyzed the wording of the letters, and forensic tests were conducted on the envelopes. Female DNA was found on one of the envelopes, but it did not match Maria Broaddus or anyone in their immediate circle. The family also installed security cameras around the house and conducted their own stakeouts of the neighborhood, but nothing led to a clear suspect. Rumors began to swirl in the community. Some believed the letters were the work of a disgruntled neighbor who was upset about the renovations or envious of the Broadduses' ability to afford such an expensive home. Others speculated it was an elaborate prank, or even an attempt by the Broadduses themselves to fabricate a story and back out of the sale. The previous owners, the Woods family, admitted they had received a strange letter shortly before selling the house, but said they had lived there for 23 years without any incidents and had dismissed the letter as a prank. Despite their efforts, the Broadduses couldn't shake the sense of dread hanging over them. They decided it was too dangerous to move into the house, so they stayed in their old home while continuing to pay the mortgage on 657 Boulevard. They eventually tried to sell the property, but the story of the Watcher scared off potential buyers. The family even proposed tearing down the house and splitting the lot into 2 smaller properties to make the land more appealing. But the planning board rejected their request. In 2019, after 5 years of stress, financial strain, and unanswered questions, the Broaddeuces finally sold the house at a significant loss. The new owners reportedly haven't received any letters from the Watcher, but the mystery remains unsolved. Was the Watcher a neighbor, a prankster, or someone deeply disturbed? Or was there something more sinister about 657 Boulevard itself? To this day, the Broaddus family is haunted by the nightmare that began with a single letter. Story 2: The Vanishing Hotel Guest. In the 1990s, a young woman named Claire was traveling across Europe on her first solo trip. She arrived in Paris and checked into an elegant but slightly outdated hotel, eager to experience the city's charm and culture. Claire was given a room on the 4th floor, overlooking the bustling streets below. The concierge, a kindly older man, handed her a brass key and smiled, welcoming her warmly. Exhausted from her journey, she took the key, brought her luggage upstairs, and settled into her room before heading out to explore the city. After a day of sightseeing, Claire returned to the hotel, looking forward to a good night's rest. When she reached the front desk, the concierge gave her a puzzled look and asked if he could help her. Claire explained that she was staying in room 408 and needed her key. But the concierge's expression turned serious. He insisted that there was no record of her ever checking into the hotel. Confused, Claire showed him her passport and receipt, proving she had booked the room. The concierge examined the documents but shook his head, claiming they had no such room under her name and no record of her stay. Panicked, Claire insisted on going to room 408 herself. The concierge reluctantly accompanied her upstairs. When they reached the 4th floor, she found the hallway completely unfamiliar. The room she had stayed in earlier was not there. In its place was a blank wall. Her luggage, clothing, and all her belongings had vanished as if they had never existed. Claire began to feel a deep sense of dread. Refusing to back down, she demanded to speak with the hotel manager. The manager arrived, equally insistent that there was no record of her stay and no room matching her description. Claire described the antique furniture, the floral wallpaper, and the distinct creaking sound the bed made, but the staff looked at her as if she were imagining things. Desperate for answers, Claire asked to see the housekeeping staff. When questioned, the housekeepers denied ever seeing her or cleaning a room that matched her description. Claire's pleas began to draw the attention of other guests. Embarrassed and confused, she left the hotel in tears and went to the local police to file a report. The officers were polite but dismissive, chalking up her story to a misunderstanding or perhaps exhaustion from traveling. Claire knew what she had experienced, but no one believed her. Determined to uncover the truth, she returned to the hotel the next day to investigate on her own. To her horror, the staff denied ever seeing her again. The concierge who had originally checked her in was no longer there, and no one admitted to knowing him. The hotel records showed no indication of Claire's booking, and no trace of her belongings was ever found. Claire eventually left Paris, haunted by the experience. Over the years, she shared her story with others, but it became a tale of skepticism and disbelief. To this day, no one knows what really happened at the hotel. Did Claire stumble into some kind of alternate reality? Was she the victim of an elaborate scheme? Or was there a darker, more sinister reason for her disappearance from the hotel's records? The Vanishing Hotel Guest remains one of the most unsettling urban legends, a tale of mystery and fear that leaves more questions than answers.
Story: The Phone Call from Beyond. It was late one evening when Jack, a 32-year-old electrician from a small Midwest town, sat alone in his living room. His life had been difficult in recent months after the passing of his grandmother, a woman he was especially close to. She had practically raised him, and her absence left a void that felt impossible to fill. Despite his grief, Jack found some comfort in the little things that reminded him of her: the old rocking chair she loved, her favorite music, and even her well-worn recipes. On this particular night, Jack was flipping through channels on TV when his phone began to ring. He glanced at the caller ID and froze. It was his grandmother's number. Confused and shaken, Jack stared at the phone as it continued to ring. His grandmother's phone had been disconnected weeks ago, and her old number was no longer in service. Trembling, Jack hesitated before answering. When he picked up, he was greeted by a familiar voice. It was his grandmother's, calm and steady, just as he had remembered. "Jack," she said, her tone urgent but loving, "you need to check the furnace right now. There's something wrong. Promise me you'll check." Shocked and overwhelmed, Jack struggled to respond. "Grandma," he finally managed to say, but before he could ask anything else, the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening, and he could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. At first, Jack thought it had to be a cruel prank or some kind of technical glitch, but the voice, it was undeniably hers. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of urgency in her words. Against his better judgment, he decided to check the furnace in the basement, if only to ease his mind. When Jack reached the basement, the air felt heavy and colder than usual. As he approached the furnace, a faint acrid smell reached his nose. He knelt down to inspect it and immediately noticed something alarming: a small crack in the heat exchanger. A quick test confirmed his worst fear. The furnace was leaking carbon monoxide, a deadly, odorless gas that could have filled the house while he slept. Jack quickly turned off the furnace and opened the windows to ventilate the house. As the fresh air poured in, he sat on the basement floor, shaken by the realization of how close he had come to disaster. If he hadn't checked the furnace, the leak could have gone unnoticed until it was too late. In the days that followed, Jack tried to rationalize the experience. He spoke to the phone company, but they assured him that the number was no longer active. He asked his friends if anyone could have imitated his grandmother's voice, but they all swore they hadn't done anything of the sort. No one could explain how the call had come through. Though the experience left Jack with more questions than answers, one thing was clear: the call had saved his life. Whether it was a glitch, a coincidence, or something truly supernatural, Jack couldn't deny the feeling that his grandmother was still watching over, even from beyond. For years after, Jack would recount the story to those closest to him. Most listened with a mix of awe and skepticism, but Jack didn't care. To him, it was a sign of love that transcended death, a reminder that sometimes the bonds we share with those we've lost are stronger than we could ever imagine. Story: The Uninvited Guest. It was a chilly autumn evening, and Margaret was preparing her home for a small dinner party. She lived alone in a secluded Victorian house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods that turned fiery red and gold in the fall. She loved the isolation and the charm of her old home, even if it sometimes creaked and groaned as though it had a life of its own. Her guests, 4 close friends, were expected to arrive around 7 p.m. Margaret had spent the day cooking and cleaning, ensuring everything was perfect. By 6:45, the table was set, candles flickered in the dimly lit dining room, and the house smelled of roasted vegetables and fresh bread. As she put the finishing touches on the meal, she heard a knock at the door. Odd, she thought. It was a bit early for her guests to arrive. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door. Peering through the frosted glass, she saw the outline of a man standing on her porch. He was tall, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. Margaret hesitated. She wasn't expecting anyone else, and the man didn't look familiar. Still, not wanting to be rude, she opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. The man tipped his hat slightly but didn't step forward. His voice was deep and unsettlingly calm. "I seem to have lost my way. May I come in and use your phone?" Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Something about him felt wrong. She noticed his shoes were oddly clean for someone who claimed to have been wandering, and his posture was too stiff, almost unnatural. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but I'm expecting guests soon. There's a gas station about 2 miles down the road. They'll have a phone you can use." The man didn't move. For a moment, there was an uncomfortable silence. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he said, "Are you sure? It's awfully cold out here." Margaret's unease deepened. "I'm sure. Good night," she replied firmly and closed the door, locking it immediately. She stood there for a moment, listening. The porch creaked softly, as if he were still standing there, but no further knock came. Trying to shake off the encounter, she returned to the kitchen, her heart still racing. A few minutes later, her first guest, Emily, arrived. followed shortly by the others. Margaret didn't mention the strange man. She didn't want to dampen the evening with her nerves. The dinner party was lively, filled with laughter and conversation. The house felt warm and inviting again. But as they moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Margaret glanced out the window and froze. Standing just beyond the edge of the porch light was the man in the coat and hat. He was perfectly still, facing the house. "Margaret, are you okay?" Emily asked, noticing her friend's sudden pallor. Margaret forced a smile. "Yes, sorry. I just thought I saw something outside." She didn't want to alarm her friends, but her unease was growing into outright fear. The evening continued, though Margaret found it harder and harder to focus. Every so often, she thought she saw movement outside, a shadow passing by the window, a flicker of something just out of sight. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, but the pit in her stomach told her otherwise. Around 10 p.m., her guests began to leave. Emily, the last to go, hugged Margaret tightly at the door. "Call me if you need anything, okay?" she said, sensing her friend's unease. Margaret nodded, grateful but reluctant to explain. Once Emily's car disappeared down the driveway, the house felt unbearably silent. She locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she heard a faint creak from the floorboards below. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "It's just the house settling," she whispered to herself, but the sound came again, closer this time. Her heart pounding, Margaret grabbed her phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang twice before the call dropped. She stared at the screen in disbelief. The signal was gone. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Margaret's breath quickened as she fumbled for the flashlight she kept in her nightstand. She turned it on and pointed it toward the hallway, her hands trembling. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing faintly. There was no response, but the silence felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Slowly, she made her way downstairs, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. When she reached the living room, she stopped cold. The front door was wide open. Margaret's mind raced. She was certain she had locked it after Emily left. The man from earlier flashed through her thoughts, his cold voice, his stiff posture. She wanted to run, to flee the house, but where would she go? The nearest neighbor was miles away. She stepped toward the door, her flashlight trembling in her grip. As she reached to close it, a low whisper came from the shadows behind her. "You should have let me in." Margaret spun around, but the flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in complete darkness. The last thing she heard before the world went silent was the creak of the floorboards, closer now, and a faint, chilling laugh. The next day, Emily tried calling Margaret but received no answer. Concerned, she drove to the house, only to find the front door ajar. Inside, the table was still set from the night before, the candles melted down to their bases. But Margaret was gone, and there was no sign of her anywhere. The police searched the property and surrounding woods, but found no trace of her. The only clue was a single set of muddy footprints leading from the front porch into the house, but none leading out. To this day, Margaret's disappearance remains a mystery. Some say the man in the coat was no ordinary traveler, but something far darker, something that doesn't take no for an answer. Thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with those who dare to listen. Until next time, stay safe and watch the shadows.